badly damaged fire truck pulled from the ruins of the World Trade Center. A poignant reminder to rescue workers of what is at risk.
Investigators find links between two targets of terrorism, the attack on the Pentagon and on the USS Cole.
And killed in the line of duty, New York firefighters lay their leader to rest. Hello, I'm Michael Holmes.
And I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America's new war. United States President George W. Bush telling Americans once again today to prepare themselves for war.
That's right. Speaking at Camp David on Saturday, Mr. Bush said his National Security Council is planning a comprehensive assault on terrorism, and he vowed that America would win that struggle. No details of any pending assault have been released, but Mr. Bush is warning it will likely take time and it will take sacrifice.
And in New York, the search for survivors continues through the night, but now, nearly 5 days after the tragedy, hopes are beginning to fade. No survivors were found Saturday. No one's been pulled out alive now since Wednesday. In the meantime, a second man is being held as a material witness in connection with the attacks. The first material witness was arrested Thursday at Kennedy Airport in New York. A total of 25 people are being questioned. Authorities say evidence so far is strengthening the case against chief suspect Osama bin Laden.
Distant ages seem so longing for their end.
Thousands of mourners gathered at a funeral for New York City fire chaplain Michael Judge. He was killed while administering the last rites to a dying firefighter. Two other New York City Fire Department officials also laid to rest Saturday, including the city's fire chief. And that, sadly, is only the start. More than 300 firefighters remain missing. The investigation into Tuesday's attacks is the largest in United States history. Authorities now say that two of the hijackers were on an FBI watch list. Eileen O'Connor has more on that.
They booked the tickets on American Airlines Flight 77 from Washington to Los Angeles on Travelocity, using a New Jersey address, mailboxes, etc. And names U.S. officials confirm were known to them: Khalid al-Mihdhar and Salim al-Hamzi. Once on board, together with al-Hamzi's brother and an old roommate, a known pilot, they took over the flight, crashing it into the Pentagon. Within minutes, the facade of a symbol of American strength crumbled. As the search and rescue efforts continue, sources say the FBI was informed that Khalid al-Mihdhar and Salim al-Hamzi were associated with Osama bin Laden and the bombing of the USS Cole. One source confirms al-Mihdhar was seen on surveillance tape in Malaysia, meeting with the suspect in that bombing.
One was kind of short and the other two was tall.
Al-Mihdhar was a frequent visitor of al-Hamzi and his brother Nawak in the San Diego apartment complex.
They was always together. If they left, they was together. They come back, they together.
They hung out a lot at the pool, despite telling their neighbors they were studying at a nearby college.
You'll see three of them in the pool swimming, or you'll see the dude always looking out the window, another one outside the door on the phone.
At one point, they left, telling one landlord they were in Arizona, living in different cities at different addresses. As it turns out, rooming with another hijacker aboard that plane, Hani Hanjour. Hani attended this flying school, CRM, Cockpit Resource Management, but left without a certification.
He's kind of a waste of time. He wouldn't show up for flights on time, didn't do his homework.
Not a promising student, but skilled enough to carry out the mission. Eileen O'Connor, CNN, Washington.
The Justice Department is releasing more information about the alleged hijackers and the terrorist network thought to have sponsored Tuesday's attacks. CNN has obtained photos of 8 of those suspected hijackers. We want to show you all of that now. From American Airlines Flight 11, which hit the World Trade Center's North Tower, Mohammed Atta, Walid al-Shari, Abdelaziz al-Omari, and Walid M. Ali Shari. From United Airlines Flight 175, which hit the World Trade Center's South Tower, Marwan El-Shehi, and from United Airlines Flight 93, which crashed in rural Pennsylvania, Saeed Al-Ghamdi, Ahmed Al-Haznawi, and Ziad Samir Jahra. Well, the attack showed that the United States and the world that it is not easy to identify hijackers before they commit their crimes, but investigators have managed to identify some common traits. Our national correspondent Mike Betcher has that.
To help them better understand the group of people that managed to successfully hijack 4 aircraft, investigators have put together a list of common characteristics of those 19 people. Let's take a look at the list. The first 2 items, male, early 20s, that's obvious. But it also says they're likely to have Saudi passports, likely to have visas issued in Saudi Arabia, and also clean-shaven and Western appearance. Now, we also have another document which was given as evidence in the African embassy trial, and it is the Al-Qaeda training manual. Al-Qaeda, of course, the group U.S. officials say is the terrorist umbrella organization under Osama bin Laden, and this is their operational manual, the thing that they gave to their operatives worldwide, telling them how to carry out an operation. We thought we would compare this to the common characteristics on the list. Let's look at items number 3 and 4, likely to have a Saudi passport, likely to have visas issued in Saudi Arabia. Let's see what the Al-Qaeda trading manual says about that. All documents of the undercover brothers, such as identity card and passport, should be falsified. Now that means, if you look at the common characteristic list, it says most of them have Saudi passports. It's very likely, if this was an Al-Qaeda operation, that those passports, or many of them, were falsified. Let's go back to the common characteristics list. The last item, clean-shaven, Western appearance. Now, if you go into the operations manual, let's see what they tell their operatives to do in terms of appearance. It says the photograph of the brother in these documents should be without a beard. So it was followed in this case. And there is one other item that is not a personal characteristic, but it's an operational characteristic. Item number 7 in the operational manual of Al-Qaeda, when it talks about what targets to choose, says blasting and destroying the embassies and attacking vital economic centers. If this was an Al-Qaeda operation, they did follow their manual to a T.
Rescue workers in New York are refusing to give up hope. They say they still believe there are people buried alive under the pile of destruction. Now, for more on this, let's go to our Gary Tuckman standing by in New York. Gary, what can you bring us?
Michael, the World Trade Center building and the surrounding area used to be one of the most pleasant and convenient places to work. You could take the subway right into the building. You didn't have to go outside. On a nice day, you could sit outside by the Hudson River, eat your lunch, look at the Statue of Liberty, look at the boats coming by. There was an observatory on the 110th floor, a great place to take children. They had virtual reality games, a beautiful view out the window. They had a lunchroom that looked like Central Park with trees. Now that's all gone. What we have behind me now, where the World Trade Center used to be, is a cauldron of fire and smoke. And what's really incredible, and I've been here since the very beginning, but I still can't get used to the fact, basically you have a graveyard behind me with up to 5,000 bodies still buried in this rubble. We have some pictures we want to show you, shot by a man who was one of the rescue workers who went out there the first couple of days to help out, and he brought his video camera there. The police are not allowing the news media to get too close to Ground Zero, so we're relying on this type of video to show you. And we want to give you a picture of the masses of steel that are piled up to 100 feet high in places. It's literally like a mountain range, all the debris that is out here. It's estimated there are 600,000 tons of rubble. 22,000 tons have now been removed. That's less than 4% of the estimated amount of rubble. But what is also there are the victims and hopefully survivors. But for the last 3 days, not one survivor has been found, and that is very disappointing news, but they are still looking. Something that was found today, an extraordinary, poignant sight, a fire truck. And this shows you how deep the rubble is. The fire truck was pulled out by crane out of the rubble. It sat on it, ladder 18. It was completely destroyed. There were no people inside that fire truck, but that gives you an idea of what they're contending with here at this rubble site here at the World Trade Center. World Trade Center consisted of 200,000 tons of steel, 14 acres of windows, and if anyone tells you they know how long it will take to clean this area up, they're not telling you the truth, because no one's ever experienced anything like this before, no one's ever dealt with anything like this before, and no one really knows how long it will take. Michael, back to you.
Gary, as you've reported over past days, there is still hope for survivors, as there has been from the start, but as each day, each hour passes, that hope must fade a little. Is that affecting morale there on the scene?
It certainly is, Michael, because there was great hope, considering the fact that so many people are involved. There are 4,972 people missing. There is great hope they could find a great number of survivors, and they did find 6 survivors over the first 2 days. They found them in pockets under the rubble, so they weren't hit by the rubble. They were actually under the rubble, and they were able to dig and get them out. And they're hopeful they would find a lot. And what really scares a lot of the rescue workers and diminishes their feelings right now and makes them feel very badly is the fact that these people who went through such horror could have suffered even more for a period of hours or even days waiting to be rescued and then passing away while waiting for the rescue that never came.
All right, Gary Tuckman in New York at 2:11 on the East Coast here. Thanks, Gary. Well, mourners gathered in New York as 3 firefighters killed in the aftermath of the attacks on the World Trade Center were laid to rest. The 3 were among the group of firefighters who rushed to the scene when the first plane struck on Tuesday. They included that beloved chaplain we mentioned before, Reverend Michael Judge, who had comforted colleagues for decades. He was killed by falling debris while administering last rites to a dying firefighter. New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani was one of the thousands in attendance.
I believe a recognition for many of us that this is only the first group of funerals that we're going to have to conduct for our men and women and so many whose lives were lost at the World Trade Center. My heart goes out to the men and women of the fire department in particular and their families.
About 300 firefighters remain unaccounted for. Well, as rescue workers dig through the pile of rubble for signs of survivors, friends and families are also actively searching for their missing loved ones. For more on that, let's go to CNN's Michael Oku. He's at the Armory in New York, where thousands have been providing information on those still unaccounted for. Michael, what can you bring us?
Well, Michael, I can tell you that there is a very tired, weary feeling that has taken grip of this city. So many people have shed so many tears over the course of these days. And in the coming days, and in fact I'm beginning to hear it already, you will likely start hearing words and phrases that are so often used at times like this that they have a ring of cliche. Words like resolution and moving forward and a returning to normalcy. But for so many people, possibly tens of thousands of people that may be connected to what they hope are still almost 5,000 lives underneath the ash and rubble at the World Trade Center, there will be no returning to normalcy. How they try to find resolution is by coming here. I'm in front of the Armory, which is at 26th Street and Lexington Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. And here is where relatives can come forward and fill out essentially what is a 7-page form where they can give information to some of the rescue workers and some of the authorities here that might help connect authorities' investigation to identifying some of those people who have been recovered. They're asked to give them all kinds of identifiable information, from the color of their ears and the color of their eyes and their hair, to any recognizable scars they may have, even the kind of nail polish they like to wear. Over the course of the past few days, 3,100 people, relatives, have passed through the doors behind me. And at some point today, the New York Health Department announced the fact that a company called LabCorp, which is one of the biggest medical lab companies in the country, has offered to provide free DNA collections that may ultimately connect some of those bodies that have been recovered to a real identification. I spoke to one young woman earlier this evening who is looking for her godmother.
This is the only way that they can identify. So we've come in with hairbrushes, toothbrushes. Her brother took a saliva sample for DNA, and everyone's willing to do anything, but it's just a matter of waiting.
Now, LabCorp, as I mentioned, is one of the biggest medical lab companies across the country. They have 900 centers around the United States, and they've offered a number that relatives can call who are not in New York City, who don't have access to this particular armory and some of the sources here. And that number is 888-520-6952. I'll repeat that again, 888-520-6952. There's been an incredible outpouring of emotion at this particular location as New Yorkers try to get back to what they believe is a sense of normalcy. But while some of us are thinking about what happens next, there are still so many people who are thinking and focused on perhaps what was. Michael.
Sense of normalcy, as you say, Michael. It's going to be a while before that comes back, and it'll probably be a different normalcy. You know, I've been noticing a lot of young people out there, a lot of young people in New York City wearing the red, white and blue. You know, the younger generation, Generation Y, Generation X, whatever you want to call it, haven't been known for their patriotism in this day and age. Tell me your impressions.
My impressions are this, that the impact, what has been felt by what happened just some blocks south of where I'm standing, knows no boundaries. It knows no color distinction. It knows no ethnic distinction. It knows no age distinction. New Yorkers are not known for being a compassionate lot. But if you walk around this town, as I have in the past 3 or 4 days now, everybody has been hit with this compassionate feeling. Just on my way down here, I saw a group of people who were standing and singing, and it looked like it was a group of people who didn't really know each other. They had come by, and some shop owner had his television tuned into CNN. People were watching it, and another group next to them started singing. There are so many stories like that across the city, and they involve all kinds of people of all ages and of all colors.
You're seeing it up close too, Michael Oakley. Thanks very much. Now, I want to tell you that our internet website provides a special service for those seeking information about people missing after the attacks. You can post the person's name, also their picture on our website. You can see one of them there. Information on the missing can be sent to us here at missing@cnn.com. Obviously, that's an email address. OK, now let's update you on the latest developments as we know them at the moment. The grim task of clearing debris from the fallen Twin Towers goes on in New York City. These are live pictures now. Mayor Rudy Giuliani says authorities are taking it day by day and deciding when the operation switches from a rescue to a recovery mode, as we've been discussing in the last few minutes. And more promising news on the investigative front. A Justice Department official tells CNN a second person has been taken into FBI custody in New York. Now, that man is considered a material witness in the terror attacks, as was the earlier man arrested. President Bush is continuing to draw up plans for a US response to the hijackings. Mr. Bush met Saturday with his national security advisors at Camp David. He also called the leaders of Mexico and Spain as part of his effort to build an international coalition against terrorism. Colleen.
All right, Michael. Well, should the United States decide to launch an offensive, and if that offensive is against Afghanistan, that is going to create its own challenges in and of itself. It's a mountainous country, far removed from most U.S. allies. The closest and most likely launching place for any attack is Pakistan. And Pakistan's President, General Pervez Musharraf, has pledged to help the United States. But on the other hand, his is one of the few countries to actually maintain ties to Afghanistan's ruling Taliban. Well, 2 veteran diplomats say that dealing with terrorists in such a conflict would call for a new and demanding style of war.
This time around, we have a lot of enemies. We know some of them. We will find out more of them. They have an interlocking network. There's no question about that. And it's going to be much tougher to get at them. And it's going to be therefore a much more complicated and long-term effort. The Iraq War was over in, 6 weeks, whatever it was. That will not be the case this time. This is going to take some years to accomplish, and you have to hope and pray that the President can lead us all for that period of time and keep the support up.
Countries have to be put on notice that safe havens will no longer, for terrorists, will no longer be accepted by the United States. These terrorists cannot undertake the actions that we have experienced last week unless they have a base from which they operate, unless they have an organization, communications. It takes a long planning, and we cannot permit them the period of quiet in which they prepare and then they strike us.
Well, officials in Washington keep suggesting that the investigation does point to Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden. So attention is turning to Afghanistan's ruling Taliban. The fundamentalist Islamic militia is believed to be giving bin Laden sanctuary. Mind you, the Taliban have said that they don't believe that bin Laden could have had anything to do with these attacks. It's a poor country, they say. It would be impossible to train pilots there. Meanwhile, fighters in the opposition Northern Alliance are mourning the death of their leader. A bomb attack last week mortally wounded Ahmad Shah Massoud. And Steve Harrigan joins us now by our video phone from northern Afghanistan with more on this. Steve?
Colleen, a very emotional funeral is just unwinding here in remote northern Afghanistan. Thousands of Afghani villagers traveled from all around, many of them on foot, to pay their last respects to Ahmad Shah Massoud. Mr. Massoud, of course, fought first the Soviets and then the Taliban for more than the past 20 years. So a very emotional day here. His body arrived by helicopter. People were throwing roses on it, flowers, wailing, crying. A most emotional day here in remote northern Afghanistan. Now, as you know, Mr. Massoud was assassinated by a television camera that exploded just before the terrorist attacks in the United States. So what they're saying here, his supporters say that those two events are linked. They say the assassination of their leader is closely tied to the terrorist attacks in the United States. And we have the unique situation here of opposition figures in northern Afghanistan calling for military action against their own country. We've talked to high officials here in the Islamic State of Afghanistan. They say they want military action by the United States in Afghanistan against the Taliban. They say they are ready to join in that fight, fighting side by side with U.S. soldiers should those events come to pass. Colleen.
Steve, how strong is this opposition? Help us understand exactly where it fits here.
It is a shifting coalition. They say they have about 15,000 regular fighters ready to go, perhaps as many as 15,000 irregulars who would join them as soon as possible. They control about 5 to 10% of the country, and mostly they're located here in one of the most remote places on earth, a very mountainous, desert-like culture of northern Afghanistan. So the question for the opposition here is, how will they fare after the assassination of their charismatic leader, Massoud? Will they be able to bind together and form a new leader? And eventually, will they be able to take part in any operations should they come against the Taliban? Those questions still unanswered. Colleen.
You know, Steve, there's a lot of discussion right now in the United States about the difficulties that Afghanistan would create if there were to be some sort of military action and if it were to be against Afghanistan. You know a lot about that. You know the kinds of problems that the Soviets had there. What would be the challenges?
Certainly anyone visiting Afghanistan, walking around here, looking at this terrain, it becomes readily apparent just what an enormous undertaking it would be to carry on a war in this kind of terrain. Also, history, as you mentioned, the Soviet Union fought for 10 years here against the Afghanis and were driven out. That defeat really in some ways helped to bring about the fall of communism in the Soviet Union. So they failed for 10 years. Now, could the U.S. or could a coalition of Western nations do any better here, and what would the stakes be? History shows it would be a very tough fight indeed. And the question is whether or not the Afghani opposition would help in such a fight. They say that they've been fighting the Taliban for more than 5 years. They say they've already lost thousands of lives in that fight, and they say they have the experience and the knowledge to help the U.S. or a Western coalition that perhaps might fight in Afghanistan. But so far, Contacts between the two sides, according to opposition figures here, have been minimal. Colleen.
CNN's Steve Harrigan in northern Afghanistan for us. Thanks. Michael, over to you now.
OK, Colleen, thanks very much. Pakistan and Iran both say they'll take steps to seal their very long borders with Afghanistan. Both countries are at risk of receiving a flood of refugees in the event of any United States military strike on Afghanistan. Some Afghanis are already anticipating the strike. They're leaving their homes. Western aid agencies have already pulled out of Kabul, further worsening the situation for displaced Afghanis. Meanwhile, there are 8 international aid workers who have been caught in the middle of all of this. They are being held in Taliban custody, accused of attempting to convert Muslims to Christianity. Now, with the possibility of a military strike against Afghanistan, family members fear the detained aid workers may be in greater danger than ever before. Sheila Cast has that.
24-year-old Heather Mercer was excited last spring about going to Afghanistan with a Christian aid group.
She was trying to think of ways that she could really blend into the culture, and she just really wanted to immerse herself in another culture.
But within 5 months, Mercer and 7 other Westerners were arrested, charged with trying to convert Muslims to Christianity, a very serious charge in Afghanistan. And then this happened.
To the extent that governments such as the Taliban government in Afghanistan support such things, you need to understand you cannot separate your activities from the activity of these perpetrators.
Afghanistan, where Mercer is on trial, is at the top of the potential target list for U.S. military retaliation because of Afghanistan's support for Osama bin Laden, the top suspect in the terror attacks.
So on Thursday, U.S. and German diplomats pulled out of Afghanistan, along with United Nations and some Red Cross workers. There is no one from the U.S. there to continue negotiations about Mercer and the other American, Dana Curry.
Even Heather's mother, Deborah Oddie, who had just arrived in Afghanistan on Tuesday, was forced to leave. Her head covered as required, she told reporters it was, quote, devastating to leave after just one visit with her daughter.
It sounds like she's in a dangerous situation as it is, and now with what's happened in the last week, that's heightened.
Everyone's prayer is that just God brings her through this safely. She's expelled from the country. That's our best hope.
To be expelled rather than forgotten as the United States decides the next step in its new war on terrorism. Sheila Cast for CNN, Washington.
Well, President Bush is leaving little doubt about what the attacks mean for the United States. And as Kelly Wallace reports, he now faces the challenge of maintaining public support as he goes ahead and plans a response.
Spending the weekend at the secluded presidential retreat in the Maryland mountains, President Bush huddles with his national security team and prepares the American people for war.
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly.
The president refuses to discuss military options, but for the first time, he specifically named suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden as a, quote, prime suspect behind Tuesday's terrorism spree. Bin Laden is believed to be hiding out in Afghanistan, with the ruling Taliban government providing him safe haven.
This act will not stand. We will find those who did it. We will smoke them out of their holes. We will get them running. And we'll bring him to justice.
When asked if those words mean President Bush is considering using ground troops to attack terrorists, aides say nothing has been ruled out. But winning this so-called war and finding the elusive bin Laden won't be easy, says a former Clinton administration official.
We're not fighting a military, we're not fighting an organized power, but we're fighting a very diffuse and shadowy organization that has links in many different parts of the world.
Knowing Americans are hungry for swift retaliation, the president uses his radio address to say a sweeping response will come in time.
You will be asked for your patience, for the conflict will not be short. You will be asked for resolve, for the conflict will not be easy. You will be asked for your strength, because the course to victory may be long.
And aides say President Bush has gained strength from his meeting Friday with more than 200 family members with loved ones still missing, believing his job is to turn their sorrow into something positive for future generations.
While the American people overwhelmingly support a military response, keeping that support up will be another big challenge for the president, especially if a prolonged military attack means some U.S. troops lose their lives. Kelly Wallace, CNN, near Camp David, Maryland.
Well, U.S. military leaders are making plans for the mobilization of 35,000 reservists. With more on Operation Noble Eagle, let's go to Mark Potter, standing by at the Pentagon once more. Mark.
Well, good morning. The Pentagon says Operation Noble Eagle is its new name for the mission to provide homeland security and disaster relief. It covers the warships patrolling the east and west coasts of the United States, the fighter jets patrolling the skies over Washington, D.C. and New York, and the hospital ship, the Navy ship, the Comfort, which is providing lodging for rescue and recovery workers in New York City. Now, the Pentagon is preparing to activate some 35,000 reservists for Operation Noble Eagle, and notice will be sent out to most of them shortly. Hundreds of Coast Guard reservists have already been called up, and among other things, they will be providing increased port security. We're looking here at a live picture of the Pentagon tonight. Now, the Pentagon has released some new video that was shot a few days ago, shot Tuesday, shortly after American Airlines Flight 77 slammed into the building. The pictures were shot by an Air Force tech sergeant, showing the heavy smoke and the wall collapsing on top of the hole created when the 757 jet crashed into a lower floor. Since then, workers have been digging in, trying to shore up the walls, trying to dig deeper into the building. The Pentagon video shows also the heavily damaged area inside the structure. Revealed in the pictures is evidence of the human toll. These clearly were areas where people were working. Officials say it will take years and hundreds of millions of dollars to repair the damage, and they say that because the plane hit in a newly renovated area that had been reinforced, a more extensive damage was prevented and many lives were spared.
So you estimate that 3,500 people were in Wedge 1 when this happened, or could have been?
Could have been. Could have been.
So as a percentage, the casualties seem to be reasonably light, although, of course, each one is significant.
I think that the fact that they happened to hit an area that we had built so sturdily was a wonderful gift.
In a perverse way.
In a perverse way.
Now, it's believed that many employees were protected by steel reinforcements in that renovated area and also by new blast-proof glass that had been installed. Now, earlier in the day, grieving families of some of the victims here at the Pentagon were bussed into the area. They were escorted by police and attended to by military officials. For many, it appeared to be a very emotional visit. Those who wished to were allowed to leave flowers and mementos at the site. The death toll here has been placed at 188. That's 124 Pentagon personnel, 124 Pentagon personnel, and 64 people who died on the plane. Remains are still being removed from the site, and they're being taken to the Dover Air Force Base mortuary for identification. Back to you.
All right, Mark Potter, thanks very much. Okay, let's bring you up to date now with the latest in the investigation into Tuesday's terrorist attacks. Police have arrested a second person they describe as a material witness that is thought to have information vital to the case. Now, this man was detained in New York, his identity not yet been released. President George W. Bush discussed the U.S. response to the attacks and also global terrorism with his national security team. Speaking from Camp David, he warned Americans to be prepared for what could be a protracted war. He said, so far, the Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden remains the chief suspect. Meanwhile, rescue workers are holding out hope of finding more survivors under the rubble, but they have not pulled out anyone alive since Wednesday. Those hopes must be fading by the hour. Nearly 5,000 people remain missing at the site of the fallen Twin Towers. On Saturday, New York paid its last respects to 3 senior members of the city's fire department. More than 300 firefighters are missing.
While people all over the world are expressing their sympathy and support, thousands of Israelis took part in rallies in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres told the crowd in Tel Aviv that the U.S. leads the struggle for freedom, for security, and for humanity. Kuwaitis gathered at blood banks to donate blood for the victims of the attacks. Donors say they want to show their gratitude for U.S. involvement in the Gulf War after the Iraqi invasion in 1990. And then in Britain, soccer players observed a minute of silence. They were wearing black armbands, as you see there, as a sign of mourning. Well, Russia is moving closer to supporting the United States in its proposed military action against terrorists. However, officials in Moscow are saying that they've been warning against such attacks for some time now. CNN's Jill Doherty has that story.
Russia is telling the West, we tried to tell you. Terror in the United States or terror in Russia. It's all controlled by international terrorist organizations, they say. The #1 criminal suspect in both countries, Osama bin Laden. The FSB, successor to the KGB, tells CNN it knew where bin Laden was hiding before the attacks on the U.S. and informed other special services. He's since changed his location, the FSB says, but is still in Afghanistan. And the agency vows to find out where he is and inform its Western colleagues.
Russia has never tried to kill Osama bin Laden. We usually deal with infiltrating criminals, arresting them and turning them over to the courts to be punished. That's what I think should be done. However, we have experience where when a suspect offers armed resistance in order to avoid casualties, it is possible to kill him.
President Vladimir Putin says he's been warning the West since he took office that there is a worldwide network of fanatical terrorists funded primarily by drug money. They're fighting in Chechnya, he claims, and are responsible for a wave of apartment house bombings that hit Russia 2 years ago. But the West, Moscow says, spent too much time scolding Russia for how it dealt with the threat.
I think now they understand that it is not just our internal issue. It's a problem for the entire international community.
Evil must be punished, says the Russian president.
But we should not become like bandits that act from behind a corner. We should consider our decisions and proceed from true facts.
The attacks in the United States, he says, could be compared in scale and cruelty to what the Nazis were perpetrating. I feel guilty for what has happened, Vladimir Putin says. We spoke so much about this threat, but apparently not enough. Jill Doherty, CNN, Moscow.
The terrorist attack on the United States is already having a huge impact on the world's economy, as you might imagine. Well, Richard Quest joining us now from London with a look at what might be in store for global business. Richard, obviously major effects. What can you tell us? What's ahead?
Indeed, into this grim malaise, let me bring a little bit of cheer, if that's such it is. On Monday, a degree of normality will return to the financial world when the New York Stock Exchange and the New York markets are expected to open. Others, like the Nasdaq, will schedule opens at 9:30 on Monday morning. That's 4 days after trading was stopped. Stock exchange workers have tested equipment and communication lines. That took place on Saturday. Officials say Monday's trading day will begin with 2 minutes of silence, followed by the singing of God Bless America. Members of the New York City Police and the Fire Department and other emergency services, they will ceremonially ring the opening bell. There's no doubt that the terrorist attack is already having a huge effect on the world's economy. Joining me to discuss exactly what the effect might be is Howard Davis, Britain's chief regulator of the financial industry. Howard, when the markets do reopen on Monday, the New York markets, that is, it is more than just the beginning of a trading day. It's sending a message which is an important one.
Yeah, I think it's a very important message that things are getting back to normal. And also one has to say that although the London markets and European markets have worked well during the last week, there's been a great sense that the world financial system has been operating without its centre functioning. And therefore, it's been a slightly unusual kind of week, and everybody has felt that we're really waiting for New York to reopen before we can begin to see what the impact of this disaster is.
The experts tell us that it'll be down at the open on Monday, but the truth is, whatever we see in the first 5 minutes, it's more the medium term, the confidence building, that the markets are back open. That's the important signal.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there are two aspects to this. One is functionality, if you like. Will the markets operate in an orderly way? And the American authorities, and we've been talking to them very closely during the week, I'm sure they will have that organised. Then, of course, there's the question of what direction the markets will take, which is very, very difficult to forecast. Over here, people thought they would be down. In fact, they were up until right near the end of the week. My own view is that the underlying economic situation has not been changed. The issue is the impact on confidence, and that is something we won't know about for another week or two.
That issue of confidence in the general economy. We know that the consumer and the ability of the consumer to keep spending is what is crucial. Clearly, not too many people will feel like going out spending at the moment. Look, I'm avoiding using the R word, Howard, but let me put it. Are we more likely to see a recession in the US now?
Well, the consensus forecast remains for a continued slowdown during the course of this year. And I imagine people are now reworking all their figures to say just how slow will that slowdown be. But at the moment, it's only hunch if you think that there will be a big impact on confidence. I think it's far too early to say.
And finally, what should we look for when trading starts in terms of the stresses and the strains in the system? We know the phones and the lines and all that have been tested, but so many brokerages are dislocated. So many different investment houses are basically working with two tin cans and a piece of string.
Well, the disaster recovery arrangements have been pretty good. We have seen that during the course of this week because, of course, there have been some settlements going on in the US of European trades.
Any problems that you know of?
No, and in fact, what's been really encouraging over the last week is the willingness of firms to help each other and to ensure that the system operated. There's been a real cooperative and collaborative spirit abroad. I guess it won't last. Markets are not like that. But for the moment, that's what we've seen, and it's been very encouraging.
Howard Davis from Britain's Financial Services Authority, many thanks indeed for joining us. Now, the devastating attack on Wall Street is already having an effect on some US corporations. For instance, the Ford Motor Company has announced it'll cut back on the output of cars because of production difficulties, mainly relating to just-in-time production, while restaurants and retailers are warning that they'll be hit because of the reluctance by consumers to go out and spend at this difficult time. One industry already feeling the effect is the aviation industry. The attacks are taking a heavy toll on a business that was already in some trouble. The nation's largest carriers have announced that they are cutting jobs and scaling back on their route networks. It's all part of their efforts to cut costs, which some say could be mounting at a rate of $300 million a day. CNN's Bruce Francis has more.
Continental Airlines says it is furloughing 12,000 employees, more than a fifth of its workforce, as it cuts 20% of its schedule.
Continental's just getting early. We're not going to be bankrupt first, I'll tell you that. But we're going to be first to move to prevent it. And I think that's a prudent thing to do.
Northwest is also cutting its schedule by 20%, although it hasn't announced any job reductions. Most airlines are flying reduced schedules right now, but at a heavy loss. The airline industry has been losing as much as $275 million a day since Tuesday's terrorist attacks. And even with most airports now open, the outlook is bleak, with passengers reluctant to fly. Airlines face further constraints as pilots are called up for military reserve. At the same time, the carriers are paying for increased security measures. That's why Bethune and others are calling for a government bailout.
I now, and we all of us, call on the President of the United States and members of our Congress to take immediate action to restore the stability of this vital industry.
A first attempt in Congress to provide $15 billion in assistance has failed. If the money is eventually approved, it may come too late for some airlines. Midway has already folded, and 7 of the top 10 U.S. airlines lost money in the second quarter. Prior to the attacks, the industry was on a course to lose $2 billion this year. Analysts now say that could soar to $10 billion.
The financial situation is such that I really expect 3 to 4 small carriers to file for bankruptcy in the coming weeks, and for the major airlines actually to lay off people. So it's a downward spiral.
airline chiefs will get their chance to voice their concerns directly to the Bush administration. Next week, they're going to sit down with Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta, potentially on the agenda, beefing up security without scaring away an already nervous public. Bruce Francis, CNN Financial News, New York.
So clearly some industries, the airline and many production industries, feeling the effects already in the wider economy. But Colleen, perhaps the best bit of cheer we can offer is that confidence will see the New York markets. Trading starts 9:30 Eastern Time in New York. Colleen.
People will be watching very closely. Richard Quest, thanks very much. Now, you heard Bruce Francis mention in his report that the airline industry is facing some tough new safety requirements. Federal officials in the United States say they're also considering some other measures. CNN's Jean Meserve talked to a couple of pilots about the safety issue.
For pilots, the rule of thumb in hijackings has always been be passive, be cooperative, get on the ground and into negotiations. Tuesday, the rules changed instantaneously. Commercial pilot Paul Emmons was in the air.
And my co-pilot and I basically looked at each other and said, "You want to fly or fight?" And he had his big steel flashlight, and if anybody came through the door, he was going to go after him, and I was going to get the airplane on the ground.
According to the Airline Pilots Association, pilots and flight attendants, the airlines, the FAA, and law enforcement are engaged in an unprecedented cooperative effort to improve aircraft security quickly.
We are at war, and we're treating it that way, and everybody's cutting through the red tape, making decisions.
Among the changes being considered on an expedited basis, whether to provide law enforcement escorts, whether to arm pilots with weapons, and how to modify equipment like the cockpit door so it is a more effective barrier.
This new door that we want well, I hope by Friday, really by Friday, I want a certification process approved by the FAA and the manufacturer in ALPA, and I believe we can have that, and then on our way to getting that door.
Some airlines have told their pilots to do what they must to save themselves, their aircraft, and their passengers. Pilot Paul Emmons says if his plane is under threat, passengers better hold on.
You should be wearing your seatbelt.
What does that mean?
We can start to maneuver that aircraft so that he cannot function.
Depressurize?
We can depressurize the aircraft, we can throw it around the sky, we can do all sorts of things, and he won't be walking when it's over.
Despite the financial distress of the airline industry, the Airline Pilots Association says no security measure is off the table, no matter what the expense. But some aviation watchdogs are critical. They say the problems and the solutions were known long ago, and they ask, why are we seeing corrections so late? Too late. Jean Meserve, CNN, Washington.
I want to update you now on the latest developments. Rescues in New York still digging through the rubble of what was the World Trade Center for the 5th straight night now. They're holding out hope that there could be people still buried alive underneath that rubble, but no survivors have been found there since Wednesday. Mourners gathered on Saturday to bury 3 top fire department officers who were killed in the aftermath of the attacks. They were among the first groups of rescue crews who rushed to that scene. About 300 firefighters still unaccounted for. And police have arrested a second material witness. He's one of 25 people in police custody for possible immigration violations. The other person charged in connection with the investigation was detained at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport Thursday for allegedly holding a false pilot's license. Michael.
Thanks, Colleen. Well, part of the healing process that New Yorkers and indeed people everywhere must now endure is the void in one of the world's most recognisable skylines. Now, we produced this video to show you what the skyline looked like then. Take a look at it. Of course, familiar to everyone. And then what it looks like after Tuesday's events. I remember first coming to New York in 1980 as a backpacking young man and climbing to the top of those buildings and seeing the view from the top. Of course, the World Trade Center is one of the landmarks in one of the cities in the world. Let's have another look at this. Of course, no more after the events of Tuesday. That famous skyline in photo albums around the world, on postcards, in movies. No more. Never be the same. Very powerful picture. Very powerful comparison. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, that one certainly is. Okay, joining us once again from New York is Gary Tuchman, someone very familiar with the city who's been there virtually since this happened. Gary, Those pictures, incredible. What can you tell us?
Well, Michael, you were just talking about the postcards, and that's an interesting thing because that is one of the more popular New York postcards. The World Trade Center, also the Statue of Liberty, Empire State Building, postcards are very popular too. But right now you go through New York City and you really can't find the World Trade Center postcards anymore because everybody's buying them as keepsakes. Obviously, they're not going to make World Trade Center postcards anymore. One of the sad parts of the story is that it's erased from New York City. You can see the World Trade Center 40 miles away on a clear day. And now that's not here. And that's what you have instead, this fiery, smoky cauldron behind me where up to 5,000 bodies may be buried. You know, there are thousands of emergency workers from all over the United States participating in this rescue and recovery mission, and never before have any of them dealt with anything of this magnitude. The work is physically very difficult, it's psychologically very difficult, but New Yorkers are really expressing their appreciation. We've seen an extraordinary sight over the past couple of days of hundreds of New Yorkers gathering just outside of the danger zone to thank the emergency workers who have come here. They are clapping, they are holding signs that say thank you. The intersection you're looking at right now is Canal Street and West Street. West Street runs along the Hudson River. Canal Street is the zone where the public has to be behind right now. And what they're doing is they're blowing whistles and they're letting people know that they're appreciated. The emergency workers come by, some of them wave back. I saw a couple of them with tears in their eyes. They didn't wave, they were just looking and just could not believe that they were getting such an ovation. That's certainly not something they're used to. New Yorkers in many cases are very worried, they're scared, they're concerned about what's happened, but they've been given a lot of patriotism through this situation. They've been infused with this sense that this is very important to show their patriotic spirit. We see flags all over New York City. We see posters going up. We see people painting murals on sides of buildings with the American flag and also offering thanks to the emergency workers who are here. One more thing I want to mention. People are also making food for the emergency workers. One of the firefighters gave us this to show you. It's 3 M&M cookies with a little note. It says, "Thank you for working so hard for others. Hope you enjoy the cookies," from Michelle in Yorktown. Well, Michelle in Yorktown, I can tell you, the firemen say you make good cookies. Back to you, Michael.
I'm sure they do, and I bet they're welcome. Gary Tuchman, thanks. As always, we'll be checking in with you later, no doubt. Colleen.
I'm sure they do. And there have been little acts of kindness in that area outside the Armory. Pictures I'm sure you're familiar with by now, where families are gathering with pictures of their lost loved ones, trying to find out if they're in a hospital, if they're alive, if they've been accounted for. So many of them have more worries than certainties. And as CNN's Candy Crowley found out, it's the pain and the hope. Both of them come from not knowing.
Yes, Dan? Yes, this is David Vincent.
He's an Eastman Kodak executive
How are
from
you?
Webster, New York. A man with a problem to solve, a man on a mission.
How is it being set up so that I can make the best use of my time? Because you're working a timeline here. You have to get to your daughter as fast as you can.
Melissa is missing. She's a technology recruiter at Alliance Consulting.
But we know
What
that
floor is that?
that's 102nd floor of Tower 1.
The enormity of what's happened in David Vincent's life shows on his face, but does not slow his step.
Please take a picture. Please focus on the picture. To get her face out there so that
Working on 3 hours sleep and a couple of crackers, he protects his fondest hopes, battles his worst fears, and sometimes loses.
I don't have any video of her. To be honest with you, Melissa didn't like to be videoed. She used to holler at me every time I did. I'd give anything to have her holler at me right now.
I'd give anything, he says, to have her holler at me right now. It's a rare lapse. Mostly, there is a desperate monotony to his mission.
I know she made a 911 call at 9:02:07.
It's all that David Vincent knows about what happened to his eldest daughter. It's enough to hang hope on.
When we went back to the cell phone provider, the only thing that we had that they could tell us is that there was a 911 call made from that cell phone at 9:02, which was some 17 minutes after the jet had piled into the thing.
9:02:07. He tells it to everyone he talks to. He clings to it for dear life, because of course it is.
I need to know where she was when she made that call, because that will tell me whether she was downstairs just getting off the path and maybe in a void someplace downstairs, or whether I have to understand that she was upstairs on 102 and have to wonder whether she was able to get out or not able to get out.
By evening, David Vincent has pretty much worn out the corner of 26th and Lexington, and his cell battery is fading, so he moves on. Craig Spitzer is CEO of Alliance. 7 employees, everyone thought to be in the building that morning, are missing. He cannot, will not, bring himself to believe they're gone.
I'm not going to say that to you right now.
You can't?
No, and I won't. And I won't for myself, and I won't for the people in there.
In there is a room full of people who have loved someone too long to give up so soon, and what's left after hope is unthinkable. It is why they agreed to expose this rawest of human times to the glare of the camera lens, because maybe somebody out there has information about Roland, something that will keep his brother moving.
I go to sleep with hope, I wake up with none.
And perhaps somebody saw Eric in a stairwell racing to safety.
We don't know, maybe he's out there someplace, got hit on the head and he doesn't know who he is. You know, maybe he's unconscious and he didn't have any identification on him.
And as it turns out, nobody can say for sure that Melissa was in the office for that 8:30 meeting.
I have to tell you, Craig, that's the best news that I could possibly hear, because what you're telling me is you can't confirm Melissa in that office space, and that's what I had to know. Yeah. That's what keeps me going.
So if you know anything about Melissa, call her father. He'd give anything to hear her holler at him again. Candy Crowley, CNN, New York.
New York's fire department buried some of its own on Saturday. Fire Chief Peter Ganci, Deputy Commissioner William Feehan, and the department's chaplain, Father Michael Judge. Their loss has left some of their friends asking, why them? Why not me? Richard Bystone has that story.
Surgery is going to keep news photographer David Handschuh away from some friends' funerals, but this one he wasn't going to miss. Because in the line of duty, he saw a lot of Father Mike Judge, the firefighter's chaplain, who was killed Tuesday while giving last rites to a fireman.
He would hold your hand and you would just feel good. He emanated some form of just positive goodwill that nobody else I've ever met could. By just touching you, by putting his hand on you and giving you a hug, you just floated away happy.
Many of those in the overflow crowd had narrow escapes that day. David Handschuh had 2.
You hear the sound and then the building starts falling down in slow motion. And I'm a photographer. The initial reaction was to raise the camera and take a picture, but something up here said, just run. And in the 20 plus years I've been doing this, I've never once run from anything. But it probably saved my life. The wall of debris that came flying down just picked me up and threw me a block.
One leg shattered, the other torn up. Firemen pulled him to a delicatessen. Another photographer captured that moment, but it wasn't over.
When the second building collapsed, the facade of that building was blown in. We were trapped once again. Using their hands and tools and sheer strength and will, they pushed their way out.
For news photographers, cameramen, reporters, days like that are part of an unwritten contract with life. So too with soldiers, policemen, firemen, which doesn't make it much easier. But the thousands still missing downtown, they didn't sign up for this.
I'm so sorry that so many people lost their lives over this. It's not comprehensible. It's not right.
At the end, the photographer pulled out his camera. It may not make much of a picture, but this one's personal. Richard Bystone, CNN, New York.
And you know, the people waiting downtown today, some of those people still searching for their relatives. We talked a little bit about the small acts of kindness that are out there. A gospel choir, a group of gospel singers actually came out and sang for them as they stood there and waited to register the names and descriptions of their loved ones to try to lift their spirits a little bit.
Spontaneous stuff. You know, there's been so many images around in the last few days. Let's leave you now briefly with some images of yet another day of sadness, of hope and of inspiration in New York City.
And we'll be back.